Basically, your cycle is as complicated as mine, but the dosages are 10 times higher, and you're still not getting your pro cards. Yeah, at one point they will catch up with you, and even though you might have high tolerance for the drugs now, at one point you won't have it. Vigorous Steve here with the Vigorous Q&A for all of your bodybuilding related questions. Today's question is from Mika. High affinity versus high tolerance to drugs. What leads to the elite levels? Well, actually both. You need high affinity, good genetics, good response to the pharmacology that's involved at the highest levels of bodybuilding, but you also need to be able to tolerate them. Now, it's not a given that you need to use high dosages at the highest level. I mean, as you guys could see from BioBros episode 9, I believe, over on Derek's channel, when we reviewed the IFBB Pro's blood work and his cycle, you said that the dosages were actually quite low, even though it was a multitude of different compounds, and taking 50 milligrams of anadrol per day for 14 weeks in duration was a bit excessive. The overall dosage exposure was about 2,000, 2,200 milligrams per week, which is nothing unheard of on the amateur ranks. But this individual obviously has good response, good genetics, great muscle insertions, everything nice, round and full and popping. Whereas most people on 2,000 milligrams per week in a caloric deficit would certainly not look anywhere close to this particular person. Now, what he means with high affinity is, of course, the genetic response. You want to be able to get good results out of a low dose, allowing you to push the dose higher when you get to the elite levels. So let's say, I think I already made a video about how to know if you have good genetics or not. I'll link it at the end of this one. Long story short, if you do your first cycle, and it's basically a first cycle that everybody in the gym and the internet would laugh about, 250 milligrams a test, a little bit of turinabol, maybe some clen, blah, blah, blah. Cookie cutter low dosages, the low kinds of dosages that nobody's going to believe, the low kinds of dosages that people will call you a liar for, even though you just admitted to taking anabolic androgenic steroids and perhaps other performance-enhancing drugs. The response that you get out of a low dose is so far above and beyond of what the average person would get out of a comparable dose, or maybe even double the dose than you were running. If you have good genetics, good response, you will blow up, and everybody else, your best friend, your gym bro, even your brother, is not going to get anywhere close to the results that you got. And unfortunately, nobody's going to believe you because you fall into that 1% of genetically awesome people that respond very, very well to a low dose of performance-enhancing drugs. And the other 99% of the people are just going to get average response, if that. So keep that in mind. If you blow up on your first cycle, even though if you don't know so much about bodybuilding, you don't know so much about training, your nutrition is kind of ass, and your cycle design is kind of ass too, but you still get phenomenal results, the elite level is meant for you. You were born this way. You were designed to be a phenomenally developed IFBB Pro. And if that doesn't happen, just like it didn't happen for me, you're better off doing something else, right? You can still enjoy your bodybuilding, but you shouldn't aim towards the top. So you have to keep that in mind. If you're one of these single percent individuals that gets a good response, you should be able to go pretty far, maybe even turn pro on a dose that, again, nobody's going to believe because your dosages are lower than everybody else, but you're responding much better to them. So you got a higher affinity for the drugs that you're taking. Then when you do get to the elite level and you need to stand next to the freaks, the guys with shoulders up on shoulders, which are probably full with scar tissue or synthol or whatever else, right? I made a video about that. I'll link it at the end of this one. Hopefully some guys will use that practice and get rid of those oily delts, which looks absolutely nasty. So let's say you get to the elite level and you've used moderate dosages up to 1,500 milligrams of anabolic androgenic steroids and 4 units, 6 units of growth hormone, maybe a little bit of insulin, a couple other compounds, but never really pushed it. When you get to the elite level and you need to push it to be competitive because all the other guys are pushing it or even have a better genetic response and higher affinity for the drugs than you do, or better shape, or they get into better conditioning, or they have better skin, right? All these little things start to matter at the elite level. Once you get there, then you have your health still intact. And if you need to push higher dosages, even though you might have a high tolerance for drugs and you don't get so much side effects initially, inevitably those are going to catch up with you. And we see with the organ stress that is potentiated with higher dosages of gear, it's not going to kill you overnight. It's going to kill you over a decade. So when you're pushing for your pro cards and you think you have a high tolerance for drugs, you're running a gram of test and a gram of tren and a gram of boldenone and whatever else, like you're doing a 5-gram cycle and 12 units of growth and 80 to 100 units of insulin. Basically, your cycle is as complicated as mine, but the dosages are 10 times higher and you're still not getting your pro cards. Yeah, at one point that will catch up with you. And even though you might have high tolerance for the drugs now, at one point you won't have it and your organs are going to fail. So if you really want to push for the highest level, look back, see how you responded on your first cycle. If you blew past everybody else in the gym, you have good genetics. And then it's basically up to your work ethic. Can you get into phenomenal conditioning? Can you structure your diets based on your individual digestion? If you can't do that, hire a knowledgeable coach. Do you have access to high quality pharmaceuticals and do you have the money for them? Because pharmaceutical grade performance enhancing drugs are pricey. They're not cheap, guys. You pay an arm and a leg to get pharmaceutical grade. You get what you pay for, but not everybody has the money to set aside that much on their drug bill because they have other bills to pay. Again, the food is going to be expensive, the gym membership, etc., etc., etc. Also made a video about that, about how expensive it's going to be if you want to reach the highest level. Link it at the end of this one. So you have to keep all of that in mind. Ideally, you have both. You have a high affinity and response to the performance-enhancing drugs which are involved, but you also have a high tolerance in case you get to the elite level and you need to push it to jump over those guys who have been pushing it for a while or have even better genetic response than you do, right? And are willing to take more risks. So again, it's up to your individual makeup, what you were given and how much you can pull out of your DNA using performance-enhancing drugs. I mean, that's what we're all doing here. We're using performance-enhancing drugs to squeeze every little thing out of the DNA that we were given. And some guys have better DNA than others and can tolerate a fuck ton of drugs and walk away from it unscathed. And yet other guys, they take 250 milligrams of test and they get cystic acne, hair loss, gyno, high blood pressure, tomato face, aggression, and then all the other side effects under the sun associated with steroids, just from a TRT dose, right? Anxiety, anger management issues, etc., etc., etc. Those guys are out there too. So hopefully you fall on the modest, decent to genetically elite response when it comes to performance-enhancing drugs. And if you have shit response, nothing happens when you take steroids. Nothing beyond TRT is going to do anything for you. It's just going to create side effects, right? It's unfortunate. But there's always other passions you can follow. You can pick up chess or rock climbing or cycling, whatever else, right? There's a million different things to do and very time consuming that you can sink all of your money into. There's plenty of other options out there waiting for you to give them a try. But if you do have both, you have high affinity and high tolerance to the performance enhancing drugs. Maybe you were born to be an IFBB pro. Make sure you have a social media account. Start banking on your presence, on your genetic response, on your shape, on your ability to get into condition while using minimal drugs in the beginning. And then when you do turn pro and you have to push it, make sure you learn about the pharmacology that's involved. Don't just rely on your coach. Even the gurus, they don't know everything. They most certainly know how to recommend drugs and how the body generally responds to them from a performance perspective. But how to keep you healthy along that journey, not all the gurus, not all the coaches, not all the educators truly know, because the scientific literature isn't really there. And we're all going by anecdotal evidence because we're taking way more than ever has been investigated. So it's up to you, even with high affinity, high genetics, and high tolerance to the PEDs, do your due diligence researching because you are the master of your own body and you need to know what you're getting yourself into. You need to know what you're putting into your body, and you need to know the positive long-term negative health ramifications of the journey that you decided to go on. So even though you might be shredded and nasty, dense, and hard and super appealing to the large majority of the bodybuilding community, that is not everlasting. So keep that in mind. You need a contingency plan. You need an exit policy. Once you stop having high tolerance and stop having high affinity for the PEDs, which are involved. I'll leave it here. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this answers your question, Mika. You can find everything that I'm associated with down below in the description section. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Vigorous. Moderate response to performance-enhancing drugs. front double bicep for you guys. Again, some guys say I have a phenomenal physique and other people say I have a shit physique. So it really depends on your preference, I guess. Right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I'm happy what I was able to build using, well, an extensive list of PEDs. Luckily, I got some experience in the process, allowing me to transfer that knowledge to you guys. But yeah, I'm happy being 100 kilos somewhat in shape. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you in the next video.